Our rapid fire celebrityhood, which is really exciting, actually. I'd like to bring Marissa Mayer on stage. I hope she's backstage. Hi, Marissa. So good to see you. Thank you for being here. So good to have you here. I don't want to keep saying my connections to these people, but I wrote the very first article anybody ever wrote about her. Right? Didn't I?
I think
you told me
right.
that
yes,
once. Anyway,
yeah.
You told me you sent it to your mother. I remember. Anyway, so
we had lunch, and then you turned it into your weekly column at the end, and I was like, yeah, so I was pretty surprised. But
well, you were doing something interesting. That's all it takes, right? That was when she was running search at Google, and she had an amazing career at Google, creating a lot of the infrastructure of the modern economy, basically. And then, as we all know, it's very sort of legendary. She was recruited to go to Yahoo to run it, help turn it around. And she was faced with a lot of challenges. So luckily, she had a giant stake in Alibaba to play with, so it certainly helped the shareholders do well, and sold it to Verizon. And now she is building something new, which I'm going to try to squeeze as much information out of her as I can. But I was actually talking to Martin backstage. You have something called Lumi Labs, which is it's not an incubator, it's a company, right?
It was an incubator in the classic sense. Sometimes you incubate teams, sometimes you incubate ideas. And basically, my co-founder and I had an array of ideas that we wanted to work on, so we hired engineers to start working on them. But at this point, we're a classic startup. Our ideas, in many ways, interrelate. We're working in the contacts, events, and group space. So I don't want to say more than that because we're still stealth, and we'll be coming out with our first product sometime in the next few months. We're close.
Don't talk about your products then, but what do you see as the problems that are out there that we're all facing? We just had the head of LinkedIn on stage, so clearly we have some good tools. But I was talking to Martin backstage, we all still, as our #1 tool in business, rely on email, which you helped invent to a large degree, but it's like a 20, 25-year-old tool.
I didn't help invent it, but
well,
I would say
what it is today, there's no doubt about it.
Well, I think that what we see is there's lots of everyday tasks that people do, or commonplace tasks that they do, that just haven't improved that much. I'm talking now to probably a couple thousand people, because one of the areas we're interested in is contacts, and I can do a show of hands here, but how many people here would say, at this moment, if we opened up contacts as they exist on your phone, that yours are in perfect shape and you need no help improving them in any way?
I don't see any hands. I can say that right now.
Because I think I've talked now to about 3,000 people, just formally and informally, and I have not yet found one. I mean, it ranges from college students to retirees to business people, everywhere in between. Everyone's contacts are a mess. In fact, they're actually embarrassed to show them. And so, like,
a lot of people actually use LinkedIn.
They'll be like, wait, like I know, do you really want to see them? Do you really want? And you'd be like, because you want to sort of see how many duplicates they have and what kinds of issues they have. But there's, that's a problem that is rich and interesting. And the same thing is true for group formation. It's really hard. If you look at all the different group formation tools are really difficult in terms of making sure you don't miss people as the group evolves and people leave the group and join the group, whether it's a group that's traveling together or it's a group of like parents and schools. It's really hard to make sure that group membership is moderated the right way, that you're connecting people the right way. And we think that there's a lot there. And tying it, my interest has always been artificial intelligence, and tying it to that, right now, AI is very focused on many of the grand challenges, which are incredibly important and will give us a lot of benefits. Self-driving cars, global facial recognition. But in the pursuit of those, we think there's a lot of little technologies that could be deployed on these everyday problems in the meantime. And it's not uncommon that when you're doing these grand challenges, really useful inventions kind of come out of them. I was remembering with the man on the moon, they did all those nice retrospectives. And it was a grand challenge to put a man on the moon, but tons of interesting inventions and technologies came out of that pursuit, including the integrated circuit. Right? The things that you need to invent to achieve those types of goals often end up being as useful, if not even more useful, than the grand challenge itself. And we think that the current state of AI means we don't have self-driving cars today, we don't have facial recognition, but there's still a rate of invention and utility of some of those learning technologies that could benefit people every day. And that's been the premise of Lumi Labs.
Oh, I'm glad you said that. It's more than you would say on the phone, so thank you. As an engineer who's been really embedded in Silicon Valley for your entire adult life pretty much, when you look at where we are in technology, how optimistic are you that we're headed in a good direction?
I'm always an optimist, and I'm particularly optimistic about technology. I think there's always pitfalls, and we have to be mindful of those, and I think there's been some surprising pitfalls in the last 5 years, 10 years. But overall, I'm still very optimistic. I'm optimistic about what it can do for the quality of people's lives on a lot of different fronts, and I think overall, technology is something that drives humanity forward.
What about targeted advertising, algorithmic advertising? I mean, we're going to have Tristan Harris on stage later today, interviewed by Casey Newton. I'm very excited about that combination, by the way. But Tristan is of the view that automated advertising per se is wrong. How do you feel about that?
I think that if you look back at the history of advertising, which we tended to do when I was at Google quite a bit, also at Yahoo, advertising is always uncomfortable. When you look at the early newspaper ads and then later the TV ads, when they first start showing up, people would say, you know, it feels very judgmental. It feels very stereotypical to say someone who reads this or watches that probably is interested in this product or service or that product or service. And then over time, as it brings value and it becomes just part of the norm, people get more accustomed to it. And I think it's always awkward to go out and say, okay, who needs my product or service? How would I find them? How would I get that product in front of them? So advertising isn't necessarily something that always feels natural at the beginning. I think that there's certainly a lot of elements of automated advertising that make sense because that targeting, if anything, starts to move it past the stereotypes and past the broad judgments of someone who watches or reads this would also be interested in this and starts to get even more pointed. I think that's one of the reasons why Google search ads have worked so well, because we used to say, look, we don't have to use demographics. We don't have to wonder like what kind of person would be interested in golf clubs or skis. The person just typed that into the search box, so we know that's what they're looking for. And that's one of the reasons why it works so well. So I think that if you use automated advertising to reach the right person who's really looking for that product or service at that moment is particularly effective. I think more broadly, it also is effective. That said, I definitely have reservations when it begins to affect governance and civilization on a broad level,
which it seems to be doing.
Which it is doing, and I actually think I would agree with the views on political ads. I'm not sure that political advertising.
Well, I know you're friends with Jack Dorsey, so you think what he did was right.
I do.
Yeah.
Yes.
And interesting, we just had Jeff Weiner up here. He did it too at LinkedIn. So you think everybody should do that?
I think that political advertising should probably, I personally have concerns just about the entire campaign finance system and how advertising is used broadly in that, but I personally think that automated advertising is very dangerous.
Yeah, for political.
Because I think when you don't know whether or not it's the candidate or it's the super PAC or it's somebody pretending to be the super PAC in another country trying to influence your country, things start to get very dicey. And so to not understand the authenticity and the purpose of that ad and whether or not it really is for the candidate by the candidate, the political games that can be played are dangerous.
Well, you are so deeply embedded in Silicon Valley culture. How do you feel about this view that so many people, even in this room, have, that it has fundamentally gone off the rails in terms of its, you know, even to use Jeff's terminology, capability for compassion?
I don't know that I feel that I agree with that. I think that I still, I know so many people in the area, and I feel that they are compassionate and they are ethical. I definitely think that there have been some very prominent problems, right? The influence of the elections is an example. Obviously, Theranos is another example. There certainly are issues, but I personally don't think they're systemic. That's not my view.
One of the things I want to just touch on, and I want to give the audience a chance to ask you questions because I know there's plenty of people that would have them. You've been on the board of Walmart for quite a while, what, like 5 or 6 years?
7 years.
7 years, right. And you would have loved being here yesterday because several speakers spontaneously, including Esther Dyson, is she still there? She's working in Muskegon, Michigan. And one of the things that she has helped facilitate there is Walmart getting more deeply involved with the community health. In some very interesting, creative ways. And she made the point, I think it was on stage, that Walmart is so big that it's in its interest to have a healthy American public, right? Which is a great synergy, right? I don't know, I know you said in an email you sent me you can't talk about board machinations. I don't want you to do that, but how do you, just talk about what you've learned about Walmart and how should we understand? I think Walmart, considering its scale, is an extremely good role model for other big companies in many, many ways. They've had famous mistakes like in Mexico, et cetera, but their community attitudes and their attitudes towards environmental responsibility are singularly impressive. Why is that?
Well, I'll start off because I think it is an interesting example, and it sheds a lot of light on how Walmart approaches things. But when I joined the Walmart board, I was at Google. I had been at Google for about 10 years. I didn't want to leave Google, and I approached Larry, Sergey, Eric, and David Drummond and said, I'd really like to join some boards because I'd like to understand how other companies work, and I've only been at Google, and I'd like to understand what's the same, what's different across different industries. And I spent a couple of years trying to find the right board. And pretty much everywhere I turned, anything I was interested in had a conflict with Google. And so I ended up I would look at one and they all had conflicts. And it was interesting because then Walmart approached me and I thought, well, there's certainly going to be a conflict. And they said, look, we're so big, everybody on our board has conflicts. It's just how you manage them, right? Because they're like, we have conflicts with everything. I was like, oh, it never even occurred to me to just go so big that there would definitely be conflicts, but they would be really professional in how to manage them. And so, but it really is true, and they've handled it really well. And there are areas of conflict, and we recuse ourselves and or step out when those occur. But overall, I think what I've learned a tremendous amount about the company, about America and the American consumer, and how to run just a really first-rate company and a first-rate board. I think the really impressive thing about Walmart is the scale. I've been privileged at both Google and Yahoo. They're both companies at scale, and I really like thinking at scale. But the scale of Walmart is just really mind-boggling at times. When you talk about, when you meet with the logistics team and they talk about how to move the mountains of stuff that ultimately ends up in all of our homes, and really basically outfitting most of American households and groceries and food. It's really amazing. But on a policy level, for example, I've been impressed with the types of change for good they can make. So. In 2015, President Obama made a speech and said, we want to get the minimum wage to $10 an hour over the next 3 years in 2018. And the next month, we had the board meeting, and Doug McMillon, our CEO, said, we could just take a position and we could make that wage change now. And he's like, and it wasn't something that we were projecting. It's something that we'd have to go back and re-message. And we all said, we should absolutely do it. That's where we're going to end up anyway. It's the right thing to do for our employees. And gave him a lot of encouragement. And ultimately, it's Doug's call. And he did it. And the interesting thing was that because that employs, I think it's 1.3 million Americans, and it didn't actually affect that many people, but it was nice to have that out there as a very firm baseline. We took that position, and pretty much every other retailer in the country had to take that position within a month just to ultimately be competitive. And I was like, wow, the president lays this out as a 3-year plan, Walmart decides to do it, and 6 weeks later, the country is there.
And there's other things like that.
That level of scale is really amazing. Same thing on the environment. Yeah. They had taken good positions, in my view, on guns and firearms, and so they've got really good values, and they're good people, and they think a lot about the impact on the world. And I think it's been really amazing to be able to sit in that room and watch how those decisions are made and participate.
Two more that I would mention. I believe they are the country's largest customer for solar panels because they've made such a big commitment to solar. They also made a commitment to go all organic in their vegetables over time. These are big, big things to do, and for a company of that scale, the impact is astonishing. So I think they are a role model. Who has a question or comment for Marissa? Somebody must have a question. Everybody's, okay, right here. Identify yourself, please.
Venkat Machurla from Andreessen Horowitz. Marissa, there's a whole alumni of product leaders who've you've mentored over time. So I'm just wondering, when it comes to mentorship, what you've learned and what are the key aspects on that?
Sure. I ran a program at Google called the Associate Product Manager Program, where we hired top computer science graduates right into product management, which is unusual. Most companies would say they have to go and be engineers for a while first and then move into management, but we moved them straight into product management. They didn't actually manage teams, they managed products, and put them through a 2-year rotational program where they would work in an area for a year and then they would switch. and then work in that area for the next year, and then it was an up or out program. If they were doing well, they got promoted to full product manager, lost the associate part of the title. Otherwise, they would leave. And through that process, I think in the end, over 10 years, I hired 220, I think it's 218 people. It's funny because they're all my kids. I go to their weddings, I buy their baby presents when they have children, and so I really do think of them as my kids. And I was the den mother. We'd go to recruiting events. I'd be like picking up the hoodies and stuff they left behind. But for mentoring, what I've learned is, one, there's a lot of mentoring programs where it's someone completely outside of the organization you're working with and not day to day. And I actually find that to be helpful to the associate product managers, it was helpful for me to have the context and know, okay, they're working for this manager, this is their tech lead, these are the kinds of personalities that are in the mix, these are the types of problems that they're working on, these are the types of problems that matter, these are the types of problems that aren't ultimately going to matter. So I feel that actually mentoring within a company, or certainly within the same industry, is actually incredibly important. And I found that it definitely is quality over quantity. Interestingly, because I was the coordinator and the executive sponsor for the program, when we do the rotation at the end of the year, I would meet with all of the APM 1s to 2s, so all the people who are in their transition year and all the people who are about to graduate. And I would say, basically, what have you learned the last year? What have you liked about it? What have you not liked about it? What did you learn from your manager? And then I would say, for next year, what do you hope? What do you hope you'll like about your job, not like about your job? What are you hoping to see in your manager? And then I would make them fill out a Mad Lib that would say, I used to do X, and now I'm doing Y, and by doing that, I'm learning Z. Right, so I'd be like, so you might say, I used to work on this product, and now I'm working on that product, and they're both mature products, so I'm learning what's the same and what's different in a mature product cycle. Or you might say, I'm working on something super nascent, now I want to work on something that's much more mature, and I'll learn this. Or I used to work on something advertiser-facing, now I'm going to want to work on something user-facing, so I understand how different customer and user groups are different. Those types of things. And by actually, for me, what I saw was it basically was an hour-long conversation with each of them. I would do it every May, so I basically would just sacrifice my weekends in May and have those conversations. But I would learn a lot about the company, all the areas they were working on, so it was very enriching for me. But I also realized that even just that 1 hour a year of dedicated time and having some retrospective questions, and usually I would be adjacent to the area they were working in, but not necessarily their manager or right in there with them. I think those were some of the keys. So I think you want to be close, but not too close. And I think that a lot of people will be like, oh, you need weekly mentoring. I found it was better to do more concentrated blocks of time over slower intervals. That said, I do want to give, one of the things we did in that program is we had management coaches. And so it's also unusual, but we hired for these new grads right out of school, management coaches that they got to meet with for a half an hour every 2 weeks. And I would tell them, people would be like, how should I use my management coach? And I was like, real life circumstances are always a great use. So I'd be like, that email you've been hesitating to send, print it out and talk about it with your management coach, right? Like the argument that you had with your tech lead this morning, go and rehash it and figure out how to improve it. Because a lot of times, especially for a new grad, and just anyone new in a company really, they don't want to go to their manager and say, I'm having this problem. So to actually have a sounding board where they can say, I think I sent this email I probably shouldn't have sent, and now it's kind of escalated in a way that I didn't really want it to, right? Getting in there on the day-to-day and helping them work out the nuances of how they can accomplish their job and how they can be effective was important. And so I don't underestimate the impact that those management coaches had, especially once we sort of moved into the model of bringing your management coach a real life example that's going on at the moment.
Well, from the first conversation I ever had with you, I knew you were an incredibly thoughtful manager as well as a thoughtful engineer and innovator. So I think you've shown that both characteristics here. I can't wait to learn more detail about Lumi Labs. So